The centenary of the Ballyfermot train ambush, 1921 to 2021. These are the events that led up to the Ballyfermot train ambush on the 8th of July 1921 on the railway bridge on Leafenew Road. These events, the 7th Lock Bridge ambush and the train ambush, were led by volunteer Captain Padraig O'Connor. We are privileged to have these accounts told to us by Padraig's nephew, Diarmuid O'Connor, Ballyfermot man, author and historian, and long-time friend of the Ballyfermot Heritage Group. Ballyfermot 100 years ago. It's important to bear in mind that Ballyfermot was largely a rural landscape with a sparse population settlement. And when viewing the town's role and the part played by its inhabitants and those of its neighbouring parishes during the period often known as the Irish Revolution, the responsibility for Irish volunteers and later Irish Republican Army. Operations in Ballyfermot lay with the 4th Battalion F Company with Commander Padraig O'Connor. The centre of Ballyfermot was Grange Crossroads, which now is the intersection of Leafenew Road and Ballyfermot Road. As you go up Leafenew Road where the lawns is today, you come to where there was ruins of the old graveyard on your right. There was also ruins of an old castle and a schoolhouse, and the Church of St. Lawrence. As you go over the railway bridge on Leafenew Road, this area was known as Gallanstown. And this is where Norton's dairy farm was. There was a few small Landleague cottages on the left. And some of them are still there today. In 1921, the volunteers were very active in this area, between the railway bridge and the 7th Lock Bridge. I'm on the railway bridge here on Leafenew Road, where in 1921 a train full of British soldiers were travelling from Kingsbridge to the Curragh, and it was ambushed by the local active service unit, F Company 4th Battalion, which was led by Padraig O'Connor. Padraig was also involved in the murder of Sergeant Michael Hallisey, just up the road here at the 7th Lock Bridge. Hallisey also features in our documentary. We're telling this story from the personal family notes and statements left by Padraig to his family.
Actions carried out at Ballyfermot and the surrounding areas during the Irish War of Independence 1919 to 1921. It is not just a record of those actions carried out in the name of the Irish Republic in these areas listed, but is also to recall the endeavours of those people who took part in these actions with their flesh and blood. These events will be followed by the participation of a family, the O'Connor family of 46 Nash Street in Chicago.
I met up with Ballyfermot author Diarmuid O'Connor, who has researched this period of history extensively. And in his book, Sleep Soldier Sleep, he explains his family connections with this period of Dublin and Ballyfermot's struggle for freedom. Well, Diarmuid, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Sean.
And thank you for taking the time out to help us out. As you know, this is the centenary of the Ballyfermot train ambush, in which your uncle Padraig O'Connor was in command.
That's correct.
Now, your uncle Padraig and his two brothers and sisters were also involved in the fight for freedom.
That's correct, yeah, that's right. Sean, Padraig, Mary Jo and Holly.
And also, the struggle for freedom goes way back in your family.
Yes, it goes back to my grandfather's time.
To the mid-1800s.
That's right.
So maybe we'll start, if you just tell us a little bit about your grandfather.
Well, my grandfather, John O'Connor, was born in 1877 and raised in Newcastle West in County Limerick. He was one of the founding members of the Gaelic League along with Douglas D. Hyde, Owen MacNeill, and from that moment on was employed as a Gaelic League teacher, and he travelled the length and breadth of Limerick holding teaching classes indoor and outdoor, and sometimes he was glad to receive his wages when he did occasionally arrive. His father Michael was a Fenian and took part in many skirmishes in the area, and was the owner of a sawmill, and he was referred to locally as Mike the Sire. He met the love of his life, Catherine Hayes, from the town of Adair in the same county Limerick, and they married in 1897. In 1900 he travelled to Dublin to attend the Gaelic League Congress held at Rotunda. A group photograph on that day shows him and others who influenced his thinking. Padraig Pearse, Douglas de Hyde, Owen MacNeill among them. In 1905 he was posted to Killaloe to teach in the local school, and it was here he started to write his book, the Kincora Book of Verse, and he became widely known in the area as the man on the bike. John and Catherine had no less than 8 children from their marriage. Maura, Mary Jo, Padraig, Sean Og, Michael, who was referred to as Holly, Kathleen, Turlock, Ethna and Pearse, my father. In 1911 he was moved from Killaloe to Selbridge, a town on the outskirts of Dublin, and from there the family moved to Inchicore. They took up residence at number 46 Nash Street on Good Friday 1916, which was situated again on the outskirts of Dublin City, and over the years they would be joined by Ethna and Pearse. Pearse was my father. They had hurriedly travelled from Selbridge, County Kildare, as the British authorities were taking a special interest in John O'Connor's classes in Maynooth, Prosperous and Selbridge. He was also a member of the IRB and the Irish Volunteers. In 1914 he shared a platform with Padraig Pearse at Selbridge and Bodenstown while recruiting volunteers. Maura, Padraig, Sean Og and Micheál joined with their father as members of the Irish Volunteers. During the same year, John Shanashan had brought his son Padraig in a taxi to Howth, a harbour in Dublin, accompanied by Art O'Connor, no relation, to collect 15 rifles off the Asgard, skippered by Erskine Childers when it landed guns and ammunition. The 15 rifles were later became known as Howth rifles, were hidden in Hazel Hatch in Selbridge. It was late in the evening when the furniture arrived at the new house, which was secured for them by Padraig Doyle. The house was close to the Inchicore railway works where John had worked for some months. John O'Connor's efforts to get into a garrison of the volunteers in the city with his son Padraig failed, and a day later Padraig attempted to get into a position with his younger brother Sean, only to be arrested and imprisoned in Beggars Bush barracks for a few days. In 1917, Thomas Ashe died after being force-fed while on hunger strike, and Padraig was one of those volunteers selected to provide a guard in the city hall where Ashe lay in rest, and he was also selected on the firing party at Glasnevin Cemetery. During the general election of 1918, F Company IRA were very active in securing a good result for Sinn Féin, who won the elections with a massive landslide. Shanna Sean was elected to the Dublin Corporation on a Republican Socialist platform. The military wing of the IRA defending the areas of Inchicore, Ballyfermot, Bluebell was F Company 4th Battalion Dublin Brigade IRA. It was commanded by Jim Donnelly and Christy Bourne, and they were later joined by No. 4 Section Active Service Unit. The Active Service Unit leaders during this active years were Gus Murphy, who was shot dead in a shootout with British soldiers, Michael Sweeney, who was seriously injured in an attack on a British patrol at the halfway house in Crumlin, and finally Padraig O'Connor, Commander No. 4 Section Active Service Unit. The enemy forces comprised of the British Army, Royal Irish Constabulary, known as the RIC, Black and Tans, known as the Auxiliary. Some of the actions carried out in this area: September 1919, shootout between the British Army and F Company member Padraig O'Connor on Tyrconnell Road in Inchicore. Late September 1919, 10 members of the F Company arrested at the sandpits in Ballyfermot while training by Sergeant Michael Harrisy, RIC. November 1919, trial of the above mentioned people arrested at the sandpits in Ballyfermot, which was held at Lucan Courthouse. Attack on the British forces at the Red Cow Inn on the Naas Road and at the Halfway House at Crumlin. February 1921, attempt to rescue Simon Donnelly, Ernie O'Malley and Frank Teeling from Kilmainham Jail. The 31st of March 1921, ambush of 4 RIC men at the Killeen Road, Ballyfermot, which included Michael Hallisey, who was shot. June 1921, shooting of auxiliary informer taken at Robin Hood College by No. 4 Section of the Active Service Unit. 8th of July 1921, ambush of troop train at Ballyfermot Bridge carried out by the Left Half Company of the Guard and some members of F Company 4th Battalion, Padraig O'Connor in command. In September 1919, Padraig O'Connor, on returning to his home at 24 Nash Street in Inchicore, he witnessed British troops giving bad beatings to some of his friends at the junction of Ring Street and Tyrconnell Road. He was armed with a Mauser automatic pistol. He allowed the army patrol to continue on up to the canal bridge before he opened fire on them. The soldiers returned the fire instantly and O'Connor was shot through the thigh. He made his way a short distance and lay in a doorway and held his weapon out in a desperate attempt that someone passing by might take it off him. A man known locally as Sailorman Coombs and his father passed by. "I'll take that off you, son," he said, and he reached out and took the revolver off Padraig. In the meantime, the British soldiers were advancing towards the position at the doorway, but by the time they got there, Padraig O'Connor wasn't armed, so in effect they had shot an innocent civilian, and Sailorman Coombs and his dad had saved young O'Connor's life. Padraig was taken to number 2 New Road, the home of Nellie Bushell, a well-known usherette in the Abbey Theatre, who used her home as a makeshift hospital for the IRA. Nellie had seen active service in Marylebone Lane and the GPO during the 1916 insurrection. Later she would say, "Your gun and hat" to known Republicans as they entered the theatre. On more than one occasion, she ushered Michael Collins out the back door as the Black and Tans were coming in the front door. O'Connor avoided the wrath of the British authorities, but the soldier who fired the shot was not so lucky. He went on trial for it, shooting an innocent civilian. Shanna Sean sent young Holly around to the Coombe house to pick up the revolver and returned with the revolver wrapped up in newspaper. The incident received headline coverage in all the national newspapers, one of which carried a photograph of Padraig O'Connor lying on a hospital bed. October 1919. Padraig O'Connor brought around 20 members of F Company 4th Battalion to the nearby sandpits in Ballyfermot for drilling and training. They were surrounded and fired upon by a force of RIC led by Sergeant Michael Hallisey. Half the group made good their escape, but the remainder, along with Padraig O'Connor, were arrested after scuffles and shots had been fired. The arrested volunteers were Padraig O'Connor, Patrick Monks, Patrick O'Farrell, William Scott, Michael Carroll, Edward Murphy, Thomas O'Halloran, Andrew Maguire and Patrick O'Connor, no relation to Padraig. They were brought to Mountjoy prison and detained there. The trial of the 10 members of F Company took place in Lucan Courthouse at the beginning of November 1919 and received full coverage in the daily newspapers. O'Connor spoke in defence of the volunteers and all refused to take off their caps, nor would they recognise the court. Sergeant Mullen and Sergeant Michael Hallisey gave evidence against the group of men they had arrested at the sandpits. The people in the gallery were shouting "Up the Republic" and there was an uproar in the court. And during the uproar, Padraig's mother got a dig of Michael Hallisey that sent her to the floor, and with that, Padraig's father was up and he was over and he got down on the floor. Padraig jumped over the dock and he said, "Hallisey, you're dead. We'll meet in the field again." Well, Hallisey left the courthouse, he'd nothing to fear, as the boys were sentenced to 6 months in prison. And Padraig was sentenced to 12 months in prison as he was the leader of the gang. And they were taken out of the courthouse and brought to Mountjoy Jail. Padraig was moved from Mountjoy Jail to Derry Jail because he was the leader of the gang and it was a 12-month sentence. While he was imprisoned there, he shared a cell with Nolan Mass, who painted a watercolour portrait of him. There was an attempt to break him out, but this was cancelled when it was discovered that O'Connor's release was imminent, as the trial judges in Lucan had not got the authority to pass out a 12-month sentence. So in the new year of 1920, Padraig was back in action with F Company 4th Battalion. Maura, Evelyn Cooney, Nellie O'Brien and Mrs. Flood were active supporting F Company in supplying ammunition to their comrades, transporting weapons to and from actions, returning them to the dumps in the grotto of the Oblige Church in Inchicore under the statue of Our Lady, which remained undiscovered and survived the war. There was also ammunition buried in a box in the brickworks. They were also involved in securing safe houses and carrying message, and all these were dangerous operations. On the 31st of March 1921, Number 4 Section Active Service Unit decided to hit the RIC fairly hard. And to achieve this, they had to draw a patrol into the area of the 7th Lock Bridge, on the Killeen Road. Assisting in this operation was Captain Jim Donnelly of F Company, 4th Battalion. Other members of F Company 4th Battalion, Jack Fogarty, Maura, Sean O'Connor, Archie Doyle and others commandeered a lorry and set it ablaze at the Nugget factory in Bluebell to draw the patrol into the area, and on their return they would be attacked by the active service unit at the Seven Lock Bridge, Killeen Road. The ambush party consisted of Michael Sweeney, Joe McGuinness, Paddy Rigney, Simon McInerney and Padraig O'Connor and others. After the bike patrol led by Sergeant Michael Hallisey had investigated the burning of the lorry, they made their way towards Ballyfermot. At a point after the Seven Lock Bridge and between the Killeen Road and the Ballyfermot Railway Bridge, it was agreed that Hallisey would be allowed to break through and pass the cottages where the residents had been pre-warned of a pending gun battle. O'Connor stepped onto the road and opened fire on Hallisey with his Mauser pistol, bringing the policeman off his bike. Hallisey tried to reach his rifle on the crossbar of his bike, but he did not get to the rifle as O'Connor continued to fire and old scores were settled. The volunteers made their way across the plots and into Inchicore. Liam Nolan recalled how O'Connor and his men entered the Orriswira dance and walked through the crowd. Word was already out. O'Connor had done Hallisey. The most important action carried out in the vicinity was the attack on a troop train at the Ballyfermot Railway Bridge on the 8th of July 1921. It is so important for many reasons, which is overlooked to this day. Namely, it was the first and last time a Thompson submachine gun was fired in action during the War of Independence. Secondly, it was the last major action to be carried out by the IRA before the terms of the ceasefire came into effect on the 11th of July 1921. And finally, the attacking force number 25 or more, as after the burning of the Custom House on May the 25th, there was a good loss of men killed, imprisoned and the capture of arms, and the IRA adjusted their forces. The four sections of the Active Service Unit and the squad in Dublin were amalgamated together and called the Guard. The Guard was split into two, consisting of 25 volunteers or more. The left half and the right half company of the Dublin Guards. Padraig O'Connor was in command of the left half and Joe Leonard was in command of the right half, and Paddy O'Daly was in overall command. It was O'Connor's half of the Guard, consisting of number 3 section and number 4 section of Active Service Unit members, and with the assistance of F Company, 4th Battalion, that carried out the attack. Many of the company assembled at the Tenters in Cork Street and cycled out to Ballyfermot and reported to O'Connor, who with others were going over their plan of action. Oscar Traynor ordered Pat McRae to accompany Jimmy McGuinness to take the Thompson submachine gun from his armed stump in Abbey Street to the Ballyfermot Railway Bridge with Paddy O'Connor in command. They brought the gun out in an armoured plated van nicknamed the Green Lizzie. O'Connor was informed that the troop train would be leaving Kingsbridge railway station on schedule en route to the Curragh. There was a lookout at a wooden pass bridge near Lower Ballyfermot and a volunteer from Inchicore waiting there to get a signal as to which carriage the troops were in. He then made his way on a motorbike to Ballyfermot Bridge to report to O'Connor which carriages the troops were in. The plan was put into action as the train arrived at the bridge and was slowed down considerably by the volunteers greasing the lines. 2 drums of gasoline had been prepared by George Nolan by cutting the tops off the cans, and these were poured down on the roofs of the carriages as it entered under the bridge by Archie Doyle and Sean O'Connor. The lighted sacks were thrown down on the train as it surfaced from under the bridge by Joe McGuinness. Padraig and Paddy Rigney, along with McRae and Michael Stack, took up their positions with the other volunteers and opened up continuous fire with small arms, grenades from positions along the bank each side of the blazing train. Amid the roar of gunfire and exploding grenades, Jimmy McGuinness sprayed the roof with nickel-plated ammunition from the Thompson submachine gun. The tube train, even though its carriages were blazing with a large pale of black smoke and struggling for momentum, continued on its way to the Curragh. The only injury reported from the train for that day was a jockey who was hit, and he was taken off the train at Clondalkin. It was obvious that the British authorities were covering up their casualties because the truce was coming into effect within hours. The company commander O'Connor visited the train and carriages pulled into the siding at the Curragh. Went on record as saying that after the investigation that the damage, the army casualties have to have been substantial, and this view was supported by the medical doctors at the Curragh saying that there were very many casualties. Pat McRae and Jimmy McGuinness, on returning the Thompson submachine gun to the stores, witnessed a large crowd around the newsboys at Kingsbridge Station. They thought they had hit the enemy very hard and it was in the newspapers, but it was the announcement that the truce was causing all this excitement. When the truce came into effect on the 11th of July 1921, it was a signal of rough times ahead for the O'Connor family at Nash Street. Padraig's mother Catherine died and Shanna Sean was interned in the Curragh camp, and the authorities would not parole him to attend her funeral. This was taken up by the newspapers on the day, which included an interview with Padraig himself and his sister Maura, but to no avail. Padraig took up the situation on board and went to see Michael Collins during the treaty debates. "Everything all right, Paddy?" he said, and Padraig filled him in on the situation. Collins arranged with the British authorities for a 10-day parole, but he would have to return to the Curragh immediately after the funeral, which was attended by Eamon de Valera, President of Dáil Éireann. Then when the truce ended and the treaty was signed and passed by the government and by the Irish people, the family faced a division on its acceptance. Padraig, Sean Og and Michael had their minds made up and decided to go in with the new army. On the other hand, Maura and Shanna Sean were taking the other side of the coin. Eventually Shanna Sean changed his mind after much argument and persuasion from Padraig and Sean Og. Maura would not be swayed. This was not the republic she had fought for, and referred to the split to a mutiny. Rather than expose the family split, she emigrated to France and did not return home for more than 25 years later as Madame Josephine Francois, Mary Jo to us. While Maura was in France, she married René Francois, a stonemason by trade, and settled down to a family life. When the Germans occupied France, she fought shoulder to shoulder with the French resistance. No less than 5 members of the O'Connor family were awarded the War of Independence Medal, or otherwise called the Black and Tan Medal, for their part they played in the fight 1919 to 1921. John, Shanna Sean, Padraig, Sean Og, Michael joined the new National Army in February 1922, and the following month Padraig married Nellie O'Brien from Bluebell. When he married Nellie O'Brien at Clondalk in February 1922. Left to right, the groom, Padraig O'Connor, the bride, Nellie O'Brien, bridesmaid, Miss Gannon, best man, Captain Sean O'Connor. Middle row, left to right, General Paddy O'Daly, Brigadier General Ginger O'Connell, Captain Jim Harper. Back row, Captain Mick Dunn, Private Michael O'Connor, Holly, and Captain Joe Leonard. Padraig, Sean and Michael were in action in Dublin. The battle for the Four Courts, the battle for O'Connell Street, Tipperary, Cork, Waterford, Wexford during the Civil War, and remained in the service of the army for many years. In 1938, Sean Og was commanding officer of the Irish-speaking battalion on Cade Cough at Ranmore Barracks, Galway. During this year, he invited the newly inaugurated President of Ireland, Dr. Douglas Hyde, to inspect his detachment of troops. Michael enlisted as a private and was in action at the attack on the Four Courts alongside his brothers and was wounded. He stayed in the army barracks variety shows. Extract from Colonel Padraig O'Connor's speech at the standing down ceremony at Portobello Barracks, Dublin, 1946. He suggested that his contribution towards securing political independence for the Republic and to the building of a new state was always not appreciated by the younger generation of officers. I have done the army and the state some service. This is an extract of Padraig O'Connor's speech at the unveiling of a marble plaque at the Round Towers GAA Football Club in Clondalkin, Dublin, 1948. The heroic task of 21 has passed on to the youth of today, as it is their spiritual inheritance. Pearse said that freedom can be lost and won back again, but nationally once lost can never be recovered. Patriotism was a service, not a formula. The tradition and service which is being handed down to the youth of today is therefore their sacred trust. Unification is all very well, but if the country was to dwell on a foreign culture, they would cease to live as a nation. Padraig O'Connor, 1901 to 1953. A newspaper recorded the address of Colonel Padraig O'Connor, Active Service Unit, Dublin Brigade, was a fitting expression of the patriotic pride which characterised the proceedings. Lieutenant John O'Connor died in 1927 and a member of the National Army. He received a gun carriage funeral from Arbor Hill Church to the Oblates Church and thereon to Bluebell Cemetery. His funeral was attended by the entire government and army chiefs. Sean Og died in Galway while still in service with the National Army in 1956, where he received a full military funeral in Galway itself. There is a stained glass window in the barracks church to commemorate the O'Connor family. Mary Jo died in Walkinstown in Dublin, 1966, and was buried in Mount Jerome Cemetery with full military honours, firing party and last post. Michael, Holly, died in Drimna in Dublin, 1975, and was buried in Mount Jerome Cemetery with military honours, firing party and last post. Kathleen emigrated to England and died in 1969 and was buried there. Turlough joined the Army School of Music, where he served until his retirement and received the Long Service Medal. He is buried in Athlone, 1980. Etna settled in Newbridge, County Kildare, and died there and was buried in Newbridge Cemetery, 1998. Pearse joined the Irish Naval Service. Later in life he was elected President of the Ex-Naval Association. Died 2004. A Guard of Honour from the Naval Service were present. Retired Colonel Padraig O'Connor died in May 1953 at the age of 52. His coffin was carried by his former comrades from the Oblates Church to Bluebell Cemetery and received a military funeral. Colonel Padraig O'Connor's sword is displayed in Newbridge with his collection of notes, papers and documents. To this day he rests in the area he had defended in the service to his country. O'Connor motto, O'Dia Gach Ain Cower.
Well, Diarmuid, I think this is an appropriate place to end Padraig's story. He's at rest here in Bluebell Cemetery, and he's surrounded by his mother and father, John and Catherine, his family, his friends and his neighbours. So on behalf of Ballyfermot Heritage, we would like to thank you for your invaluable knowledge and your research, and for bringing Ballyfermot's forgotten heritage to us. So, Diarmuid, a cara, gura mila maragut.
No, Hobberay, Sean. All the times I've visited here, I said to myself, Padraig is where he always wanted to be, among the people of Inchicore, Ballyfermot and surrounding areas, and I'm sure he's a very happy man.
Gura mila maragut.
From The Lady and the Lake by Walter Scott. Soldier, rest thy warfare o'er, sleep the sleep that knows no breaking. Dream of battlefields no more, days of danger, nights of waking. Soldier, rest thy warfare o'er, dream of fighting fields no more. Sleep the sleep that knows no breaking. Morn or toil nor night of waking. Sleep, soldier, sleep.